an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Evolve, chapters 7, 8, and 9. In these chapters, Aftermath carries out another job for Dr. Spears, and it's really quite different than the others have been. I wasn't ready for this. Yikes. Aftermath really is pretty scary. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Heather for commissioning this episode. Hi, Heather. These chapters, there's a lot to get through and a lot of things happen. So chapter 7, we start off at a fundraiser for the Foundation for Awakened Rights. It's very lucky for them that this fundraiser happened before Aftermath's whole thing happens, because this would have been absolutely ruined. And as it is, I don't know how much funding this is going to get at this point, because it feels like a real losing battle, especially considering that we find out, even after this horrific thing that Aftermath decides to do, it's like the precursor to the actual thing that he's going to do, which we still don't know what that is. But the fact that he only thinks of this one as like an amuse-bouche makes me very concerned. We had 15,000 people die in Japan. They still haven't, I think they say that somebody activated a fault line, but I don't remember if that is supposed to be because of Dr. Spears' influence, or if that was just somebody who's like rogue and happened to be terrible. But yeah, this is somehow like, because of the scale of those other things being so huge, this is seen as doing something a lot more personal, and especially the fact that, it's happening on American soil. It's a vibe. You know how Americans are. We can always just sort of discount whatever's going on in other countries. Once it starts to happen here, that's when we start to get really fucking shifty about it. But up till then, we can just totally excuse anything and just be like, well, other countries aren't as refined and cultured and, what's the word I really want? Civilized as we are. So it's no surprise they would have these ridiculous problems, but we don't have those problems, except that we definitely do. But they're in our real world, mass shootings. But anyway, so we start off at this hugely expensive fundraiser. Everybody is dressed really formally, and Jordan is struggling with, as she puts it, being a better person. These days, it seemed as though her thoughts dwelled far more on the bad in the world than the good, and the expedient side of her thought that a few well-placed hollow points could solve most of the current ills quickly and cleanly. It was the old Jordan. That Jordan was always standing next to her, and she was a hell of a seductress. Being a better person is fucking hard. That is true. And what's so frustrating here is that we find out later Jordan and Brian had kind of a fight about their ideologies, essentially. What they each think about whether a person deserves to live after committing certain crimes, whether people can change or should be allowed to change, and when does someone cross that line into no longer deserving the benefit of the doubt anymore? And she is much more hardline on that. And he is obviously kind of off-put by it. And there's, it's described as them both not speaking to one another for like several days and the bed being empty. And this is after they're married. And this is one of those things that, like, you know, you would think when you're about to marry somebody that you would have known where they stood on something like this. But this isn't something that comes up in conversation that much. I mean, I feel like nowadays it does a lot more because we're just dealing with certain issues at a higher rate and more in our face due to the internet. But I definitely can understand how this depth of conversation would never have happened yet. I do wish, though, that we actually got to see this fight. Because once we're told about it, it's not in this section at the party. We're told about the fight later on when she's basically sent to assassinate Aftermath. And she's already considering not following orders. And I really think that if we are going to at all like buy into her making this giant shift, I mean, we're not talking about just some random that she's like, I don't need to kill this guy. We're talking about a dude who's like out here posturing on purpose for fear. He's a terrorist. And she's still unwilling to even like completely agree to kill this guy. I want to see the way that Brian presents his argument that is so compelling that she's willing to consider it at all. Because this is a massive thing she's thinking of doing. Before, when we were in the warehouse and she puts her gun on the highest stun setting, I felt like, okay, there's a possibility she could say this was just a mistake, or in the confusion of everything, who knows who's going to shoot the guy first, and maybe there's a way that they can, like, you know, I'm not saying that Jordan would lie, but there would be no real knowing who shot what. And I was sort of thinking that she was doing this because it was going to be at least under the camouflage of the confusion of an operation with a lot of people involved in a confusing setting. But she is now considering not following orders ahead of time, like going into something with a completely different idea of how she wants it to turn out. And unless she's got other people on board with her, it's going to be 100% obvious she was the one who chose to do a different thing. And I can't imagine what their reaction to that would be. I feel like that would be really bad. Like, how I just don't see. Couldn't she be court-martialed for something like this? I feel like this could be. The thing is that this isn't technically military anymore, but like the same basic tenets apply, I would think. And I think being benched is really the best she could hope for. But yeah, I don't know. This is just like, it's a massive shift that I want to see the progress of it a little bit more before we get into these moments where she's genuinely like a little bit torn. I think that this might be the weak spot for me with Jordan in general, is that we get to see her being a badass so much. And the moments that we get to see the emotional side of her and the human side of her are a little bit less frequent. And like a moment like this where she's having this kind of conversation with Brian, I feel like would give me a lot more insight. I already know basically where she stands, of course, but I want to hear the way that they interact with each other on this, because it's like the impression that you get is that each of them is sort of shocked by the way the other one sees things. And I'd love to hear exactly how she played it, you know? And also see like her being a little hurt at the way he looks at her now. Because I feel like that is probably a massive thing. It's less about like whether she thinks that Brian is really, really right, but more the fact that he is seeing her in a new light, and that makes her feel kind of shitty, which I could see. There's something about stepping back and looking at the way you may come across to somebody you love, and realizing that it's not the impression you either thought you were giving and intended to give, or that you just want to give. And it's really wild when you step out of yourself like that and kind of go, oh man, I let them down, and they have pretty good judgment. So I feel like if they're acting disappointed in me, I've been disappointing, you know? Heather says, yeah, I think Garth tends to be concerned about undermining her effectiveness, so he shies away from showing those real intense vulnerabilities in her. Yeah, I can understand the impulse to shy away, but it does make it seem more impressive if she's able to be effective anyway. You know, that's the way that, like, seeing her compartmentalize, or not, you know, in this, she's really attempting to not compartmentalize, which is like, it's an impulse with her to do that. And as somebody who can also be this way, and I am trying to be better about understanding like how sort of illogical we can be emotionally. I tend to approach things in a very literal manner, and that's not helpful a lot of the time, and it's certainly not relatable to some people. And it just, you know, I have to sort of fight against my own instinct to approach something with a list of points, like, you know, bullet points that I want to make, and actually engage with what the emotions are that this other person is coming at me with. And I feel like that's probably what she has to do with Brian. He is much more emotionally driven. And I think that she realizes, I love this guy. And if he thinks this way, there has to be some merit to it. And this is something that I kind of ran into actually when I was married to Brendan, was, you know, back then I was not woke in any sense of the word. I used words like beta male, like I was just insufferable. And I think about, there were times where Brendan would express deep frustration with me because he was a lot more woke than me. However, he didn't really try to like educate me or like help me figure out what any of it meant. I would just see that he was disappointed and kind of disgusted sometimes because of just the way I would talk about things. And I didn't understand what his problem was, but I knew that if somebody who was as good a person as him were reacting this way, probably what I was saying wasn't great. I just didn't really know what the issue was because he never really wanted to get into the nitty gritty of, you know, I think that nowadays he'd be more willing to do that. But back then I feel, and I can understand where he's coming from and probably where Brian's coming from. Sometimes somebody like doesn't understand things at such a fundamental level that the amount of education you would need to give them before they understood where you were coming from at all is just overwhelming. And you're like, yeah, I'm not doing that. You know, it's a shame because he was my husband and you'd really hope that he would want to put the effort in, but he never really did it. And I feel like Brian is making an effort here. And I feel like there's you know, we saw from Jordan's father's perspective too, that he was concerned she was just going to become a bit of a machine, and that isn't happening. And he credits that with Lily, but I'm like, Brian apparently is a major influence on that front as well. But anyway, I'm talking about a thing that we find out later on, but I just had to bring it up here because it's sort of like in the air. And she's like struggling here with the fact that they are at this lavish party and enjoying themselves when 15,000 people died. And it was a month ago at this point. And she's just like, this feels not great, which, I mean, I understand that, you know, this is something that I think we all struggle with when there's like suffering. How am I allowed to just go on living my life and having a good day and enjoying a coffee and talking to my friend, you know? Prisoner 18, Simon Lefevre, who had activated the fault and brought 15,000 people to their end. Like Aftermath, he had been missing for months after the breakout. So far, the team had only recovered 4 of the escaped criminals, and none of them had any knowledge of where they had been. All of them had woken up in various low-rent hotels, each in a different part of the world. Yet here was Aftermath making an unprovoked attack, and now Lefebvre. There had to be some connection, some reason to it all. So, Lefebvre, if that's how you say it, and I'm going to say it like that because that's how it's pronounced at Casino Royale, has to be working for Dr. Spears, right? Are we assuming all of these prisoners were, like, kidnapped by the same person? I'm assuming that they are because they all woke up in a similar sort of circumstance. So that's what I'm going to go with. And I want to know why the 4 of them were recovered, because it feels like that has to be on purpose. Like they were allowed to be found. And I don't like that. I feel like that's like a bomb that's been planted somehow. And we don't know how it's going to go off, but it's like definitely going to go off. So this is the moment where she and Brian are having a nice little conversation about the things that he has observed about the people in the room are either weaknesses and the weapons that they have on them. And this is a fun indicator of how she's rubbing off on him. You know, he is softening her a little bit, but he is growing more aware and learning the way that somebody stands indicates perhaps they have, you know, a sidearm under their jacket or on their hip, or inside the, what do you call it? Shoulder holster. Senator Campbell injured herself playing a round of golf. She's favoring her right leg. I know it was golf because when I called her a week ago, I heard someone call 4 in the background. Which, I mean, that may be true, but it does seem like quite a leap. But I'm fine with it because it feels Sherlockian. And let's see. Brian says, let me finish. Jillian is on her 10th shrimp appetizer. She has 9 napkins sitting next to her and 1 in her hand. The most beautiful woman in this room is wearing an amazing blue silk gown that nearly everyone has taken a moment to admire, and she's well armed. A subcompact Glock G27 on her right inner thigh, and a thin bladed knife on the left, but slightly lower. And I have got to say, guys, I can't imagine ever having a body type where I can keep a gun on my inner thigh. That has just never been, even when I was at my thinnest. And I know that some women do. I'm not like trying to say this woman doesn't exist. I'm just saying like, it's really wild to think about being able to fit something like that and then just like wear a gown and walk normally. That like not walk like you have a big load in your pants that you're just trying not to like get on the floor. I mean, what? But people do it, you know, it's just bonkers to me. So he says, also you have that SAS knife manufactured by Fairbairn Sykes, given to her by her father after said father made her promise to take the life of any man that wronged her. However, neither weapon is as dangerous as the sparkle in her eyes or the charm of her wit. Pretty good, Brian. Pretty good. Heather says, to me, it's similar to the sorcery of Wonder Woman with the sword and the blue dress. Exactly. Yeah, that's one of those things. I've seen some people, after that came out, like testing whether it would work. And technically it does, but it would look wild. So overnight, Brian had become the face and voice of international metahuman affairs across the globe. The message he shared with everyone who would listen was fair and just treatment for all. He encouraged and helped devise proper laws to govern awakened power usage, and though many were still fearful, he had helped put a positive spin on the existence of metahumanity. He had brought to light the danger of alienating the awakened and the benefit of embracing them as brothers and sisters. He had death threats every day and opponents who wanted to see metahumans killed or caged. Yeah, I'm sure he does have death threats every day. Brian would definitely be the type that would like, I got a bad review on my podcast and I made that bad review the banner image for the podcast on my Facebook page. And I could definitely see Brian doing something like that, being like, oh, look at this one. This one's wild. And he mentions your sister is running the floor. Like, basically, she's just raising so much money. And I thought he meant Jill. But this is when we meet Ryan. And Ryan has a really different ability. She can, like, basically commune with machinery. And I thought that this meant when she was, like, working with machines. But apparently, she can do this from afar. Because later on, she's looking at Douglas and she's assessing his bank account. And I've got to say, I admire the power, but that feels so incredibly shady to me. Like, I would feel very, very violated if I found out somebody who, just because they could, went in and looked at my bank statements and found out where I was spending my money. I was just like, really, Ryan? You're just doing it? And you're talking about it, like, right out loud? I did not think that that was, like, a good judgment call on her part. And I feel like that's the sort of thing that you can say, like, I just wanted to see, like, what kind of person they were before I got involved. To a point, I get that. But also, it's the sort of thing that you could accidentally just mention. Oh, yeah, I know that you donate to Blue Cross. And they'd be like, how do you know that? And now all of a sudden, there's this weird shit you just blurted out because you forgot. You're really not supposed to know that. But, yeah. This, the thing that sort of saves her is that she does seem so genuinely good-hearted. It doesn't, like, if it were anyone else, this would seem like a very mercenary sort of move. That she would be like, well, I just want to make sure that this guy has some money before I get involved. And, like, we see, like, immediately with her, that's just not really how she rolls. But it's just misses, you know? And this is, let's see, she'd been building her first hydrogen engine and could barely be bothered to say hello. This was when Brian first came in and was trying to meet her. Jordan realized now that part of that was because Ryan was literally communing with the items around her as she built the engine. Her awakened abilities allowed her to understand machinery and electronics on a level that a normal human would never be able to. Even Jordan found the concept of losing oneself into a state of mind difficult. Ryan had described it as letting the machines become part of her, a melding that let her know their fundamental nature so deeply that it felt like they were an extension of her own sense of self, her own awareness. And apparently she just like goes on to be incredibly successful, which makes sense. I mean, being able to do anything electronically is always going to be an advantage in today's world. And if you can do it at this kind of level, yeah, forget it. That's just pretty much it. Her environmentally friendly designs and innovative products were eclipsing the technical giants that had formed the backbone of the world's high-tech industry. It gave her power as well as wealth. And tonight she was putting them both to good purpose. That's what we want to see. You know, like just people with amazing superpowers, just do some good. Like, this is all we want. It's really not that hard. Like, one would not think. Have you guys heard, like, Elon Musk said something about how, like, it's harder to give away money than you'd think? And what he meant was, like, deciding what charities are legit can be tricky, but I could not have like less empathy. You have like teams of people to figure that shit out for you. And I don't really see you giving all that much away once you decide what charities are worthwhile. You could give a lot more and you're not doing it, which I would just like to know why, because how much money do you really need? Like, guys, I feel like if somebody gave me $5 million, I would pretty much never feel like I needed to worry about money again. And $5 million is like less than a drop in the bucket. It's like a misting of the bucket. Really, how much do we need? I'm really asking. So at this point, she comes over and tells them that they are a beautiful couple, which Jordan realizes, like, if anybody else said it, it would feel really kind of false and weird and probably like they were wanting something, but she's just genuine about it. And Jordan says, I'm very proud of you, helping Brian with his work and taking care of Jill while she's in university and running your own company. You're a good sister, Ryan. And Ryan says, I don't sleep much. Is that a metahuman thing, or is that like just her? I can't remember if that's something with Jordan too, that she doesn't have to sleep very much. That's a Ryan thing, says Heather. Okay. And she's talking about Jill, and it's like she's doing really well. She's super focused. She's getting like high grades, everything. She's still going to parties here and there, but she's not acting up or like, screwing herself with it. And that's really the best one can ask for. You still go out and party. I feel like that's fair, but don't do that to the detriment of what your goals actually are. So at this point, Jordan is saying, you know what? Maybe you guys can come and stay with us, because Jill wants to do like a sister's day out. And she mentions the other sisters, Marissa, who we did meet in the Jill's run, Alessa and Deirdre, who I don't think we've met at all yet. And she says, Mom and Dad would love to see you both. Dad worries, He doesn't like the fact that you're so far away from the rest of us. I am like curious because I'm assuming, due to the fact that Dad's an alien, that all of these girls have their own powers. And I'm wondering how Mom feels about this. Like, because I'm assuming that Mom is human. That may not even be true. And if she is, how does she feel about literally every one of her little girls having a power? I feel like that would have to throw some, like, wouldn't you begin to wonder what the deal is with your husband if you found out every single one of your kids had a power? You'd have to be like, all right, though, where's this coming from? And I don't think I would leap to, like, clearly my husband's an alien. But I would wonder why he doesn't seem to have a demonstrable power of his own, because it doesn't, like, I don't know if Cassidy has anything that he's sort of let out of the bag, but it doesn't sound like it, because nobody really has talked about that at all. Let's see. Heather says, well, remember that Ethan mentioned something about Shauna has kind of taken Cassidy's place in the chamber, so she's probably not human. Oh, sorry. I did not remember that Shauna was his wife's name. So that name did not mean anything to me in the conversation. Gotcha. Okay. So this is when Dr. Spears comes up, and he is so, I really enjoy Jordan just being like, what the fuck is it about this guy? She can tell something's not right, but she can't put her finger on it. He's like, also, some of it she feels like is maybe just that he is so very showy. He's wearing clothing that is a little bit different, like a white tux jacket instead of black, and his hair is like so on point. And there is just something about him that is really screaming for the attention of everyone in the room. So there's a part of her that feels like maybe that's what's rubbing me wrong. But, we know that it's probably the alien thing. And also, he has brought as his date, Lena, Brian's secretary. Bitch, what? No, I do not think so. Honestly, if I were Brian, I would fire her. And I know that, like, it's saying, well, firing somebody for who they're dating, but that's not it. This is a security risk. I would feel really uncomfortable with anybody that I had in my intimate files and access to all of my personal information being linked with somebody with that kind of power and like likely agenda, because they talk about how Dr. Spears most definitely is doing shit for his own reasons. Like, he comes across as this big philanthropist, but obviously there's a vested interest that they just don't know about yet. And they're all sort of waiting on that shoe to drop. And I think that it comes across that Brian is not pleased with Lena. And she seems a little bit like stung by it. And we also, when we're in Jordan's head, she's like thinking about how she often wonders whether anything happened between the two of them. So she's no fool. She knows that there was, there was a something happening. And then she's like, it doesn't even matter. Like, whatever went on between the two of them before him and I were a thing is none of my business. And I was like, you know what, Jordan? Good on you for being mature. And the whole like interaction between them and Dr. Spears is really false. This reminded me of a couple of different scenes in Fleabag where everybody is like joking and laughing and acting as if everything is like really funny, when in fact what they're saying isn't that funny or doesn't even quite make sense. And it's just because socially we are not conditioned to bring down the vibe or be serious. And so our instinct is to treat everything like a witty joke. And that is what this sort of felt like to me, because everybody is just grinning and like, oh, yes, that's very, oh, yes, that's that kind of meaningless politeness. And it, this whole, like, Brian's expression hadn't changed, but Jordan felt his body tense against her. Lena had been his assistant for years and his friend before that. Jordan knew her husband was protective of Lena, though there were times she wondered if there was more going on. She banished the doubt to the corner of her mind where she locked such wasted thoughts away. Brian had married her, not Lena. Whatever happened between them before she and Brian had started dating, if anything, wasn't a concern. As long as she's happy, Brian replied, and let his gaze linger on Lena's for a moment. And on time for work. He smiled, though the expression lacked its usual energy. Don't keep her out too late. A chuckle circulated through the small group. It was a warm sound, but Jordan doubted there was an ounce of honesty in it. So yeah, this kind of thing where it's just like, yeah, all of us have to, act as if we're at ease, and this is very amusing, and you're so witty, and it's just nothing is real, And she watches as this dude who is clearly like Dr. Spears' bodyguard is out on the floor, and he just looks so intimidating. And she's thinking he's a little bit too far away from the guy to actually be helpful if something happens. And then she's like, well, he's too far away if he were human, but I bet he is not, which I think is a very safe bet. And let's see. He's a playboy, and that's being generous. Elgin Spears may toss a lot of money at the foundation, but he's got his own reasons. Men like him always have agendas. This is Ryan speaking. So then we have Ryan being introduced to Douglas. And I really like that this is even occurring to Jordan. She likes Douglas so much that she's willing to introduce him to her sister. I feel like that's a major vote of confidence. And he's frugal too. Did you know he gives to Blue Cross? Girl, what are you doing? No. And Ryan is like, all right, so what's his deal? Like, is going to be gone as much as you are all the time? And Jordan's like, yeah, probably. But we aren't all going to do this forever. And there's no reason you couldn't spend more time at home, is there? And I was like, no reason we're going to do this forever. Well, I mean, also you could just die because this is just an insanely dangerous job. But yeah. So Douglas had noticed their approach and adjusted his position in relation to the redhead so the sisters could involve themselves in the conversation. And Jordan can see him sort of eyeing up Ryan and is like, All right, yeah, I feel like this is going somewhere. So then we go to chapter 8, and we are in Governor Theresa Gregory's POV. And what is really interesting here, so she'd come in as a liberal Democrat, the state of Washington's favorite flavor, though that never stopped her from pulling in votes or support from other demographics when she could. All of them were sheep waiting to be led, willing to collect in a flock that she could drive where she needed. The thing about this that I really appreciate is the acknowledgement that when somebody is like, I'm not saying that they're not as good as regular humans, I'm just asking questions. This sort of thing, we see it like being presented as so reasonable, just the voice of reason from her, when in her mind, she's like, okay, they're not ready for words like monsters and abomination yet, but they will be. I just have to get them there. And this is exactly how it works. This is what people don't understand when we're talking about like dog whistles and dehumanizing language, is it's not meant to actually be the hate speech. It's meant to ease the way for the actual hate speech to become normalized. It's supposed to wear away the barriers that people have put up because it seems innocuous enough. It seems reasonable in its way. And people genuinely can be fooled by that and then turn around and be like, wait, what? When shit starts to be really extreme. And it's like, no, you should have seen all the signs. They were there. This person was very obvious in what their actual objective was. If you look at what they were voting for, if you look at who they kept company with, when they are asked direct questions, they can couch everything in language that makes it sound as if, but their actions are what speaks. And you can see that. And with her, it's like, she's just prepping everybody here, trying to get them ready for the actual violation of rights. She's trying to get them ready for the oppression because she has to incite enough fear and make people question enough. And what's so fucking annoying is that this is who Dr. Spears and Aftermath have chosen as their target, which means that this message they're trying to send is going to be 1,000 times more effective. They know exactly what they're doing, going after her. And it's like wild that honestly, she winds up fulfilling her goal in getting everybody as terrified as she wants them to be. It's just that she's dead now, and now she can't actually do anything with that. And don't get me wrong, I'm not even that mad she's dead because she definitely was very dangerous. Like, you can see what she's planning, and I know that Aftermath is the actual villain here, but these are people who shape policy and laws, and that in its way can be just as villainous and dangerous and violent. So I'm not trying to say that she wouldn't have wound up like affecting many more lives in a horrific way. I don't know that for sure. That's the thing. But yeah, this won't be easy. It will hurt. But for our own protection, we must identify these afflicted souls and find a way to reverse their conditions. We have to isolate those who are unwilling or unable to control their dangerous abilities, and we need to demand that the politicians in Washington, D.C. treat them humanely. But make no mistake, we must do something now. For the sake of our country, we must do something now. For the sake of our society, we must do something now. For the sake of our children, and our children's children, we must do something now. And I love this. This is like just that incredible, like rhythmic. It works. That's exactly the way these fucking people talk. And I don't mean these fucking people like conservatives. I mean politicians. Like, and oh God. There's a whole thing in 30 Rock where Queen Latifah is a senator of some kind. And she's like in the midst of a speech. And then she goes, and I have run out of things to say. But as long as I keep talking in this sort of voice, you will applaud me. And it's just incredibly true. Like, you know, it's as long as you have the fucking like stance, the confidence, people think you must at least know something they don't a lot of the time, and they will defer to you on that. So yeah, she couldn't use the words monster, abomination, or aberration. It wasn't time for that yet. The people weren't ready to see these creatures as the monsters they were, but that would change, and sooner rather than later. She had seen what the awakened were capable of firsthand, and that had been enough for her to chart this course. So what is it that she was witness to? What did she see firsthand? So we go to Aftermath's POV, and he's just listening and is just like, yeah, of course she thinks this. And apparently they call everybody who isn't awakened a sleeper, which makes total sense in its way. But I'm so used to sleepers being people who like are meant to be activated like undercover, you know, that I kept thinking of it as somebody who was more dangerous. And no, sleepers are like the opposite of dangerous. And he thinks to them like about them, basically, they're just jealous. Who would turn down the powers of a god if it were offered to them? Aftermath's eyes narrowed beneath the hooded jacket he wore beneath his trench coat, the softly glowing orange orbs scrutinizing Governor Gregory's 20-man security detail. I really enjoy that. I did not realize that this was something that he couldn't turn off. So he can't just walk in amongst people and really blend in. He has to make an effort to hide this marker. And also his heat signature, which he apparently hasn't got super control over either. And what he has decided to set in place here, Calamity, what exactly is her ability? Because we have a lot of people sort of like falling and dropping things around her. Is her ability sort of the opposite of Chance's ability, where he makes things like more likely to happen or more likely to go the way he wants it to, and she's more able to make things not go in a way that she wants them to? I wasn't sure if I was reading that correctly or if it was just sort of coincidental that these people kept running up on her. But anyway, Calamity disappeared into the crowd, and Aftermath could see people parting in front of her as she muscled her way closer to the podium. Get ready, my large friend. The large man next to Aftermath nodded. So, just the cars? Yes, roughshod, just the cars. Dead people can't spread the word. Stick to the briefing. You mean the boring. I would rather have been in Japan. I'm sure you would have. You're being paid to be here. Don't worry, you'll have your fun soon enough. He wasn't a stupid man, just a violent one who enjoyed chaos as much as anything else. Roughshod is basically an elephant man, but like not in the Elephant Man way. I mean, not like that, but like extremely huge, extremely strong. His head literally turns into like an elephant's head. And he has like 2-toed feet, 3-toed feet. I don't even remember, but his feet and hands are wild. That was what I was going to say. Heather says like Rhino from the comics. I was thinking Rhino, although Rhino isn't he like in a suit inside like that might just be at the end of Spider-Man. I've ever only seen the Paul Giamatti Rhino, it was so disappointing to me that we didn't get to see more of him than that tiny little clip at the end of whichever Spider-Man movie that was. She says sometimes he's got a suit, sometimes it's an actual mutation. Okay. So Aftermath leaped into the air and triggered his powers. His body was suddenly surrounded by a corona of heat that distorted the air around him. The costume he wore was specially treated to resist the temperatures he could generate during the flight, but the coat he used to hide it wasn't, and the intensity of the thermal reaction caught the fabric alight. The flaming garment quickly disintegrated without leaving a mark on the black and gold polymyomer costume. The costume would use the thermal reaction to power cloaking tech to hide his heat signature from detection. Aftermath soared over the heads of the crowd, so close that they recoiled from the wave of heat that trailed in his wake. I did not remember that this dude can fly. Unless it was just the jump. He leaped into the air. Like, is that supposed to just be like his jump carried him over everybody's heads? Because the way it sounds is like sort of he rises, his coat burns away, and then he like flies forward. But I may be like not picturing that correctly. Okay, yeah. Heather says that was him pushing off to get altitude. That's what I thought. So he can fly? That's like so unfair. That's like way too much. Like, what do they do with that? I can't believe he ever got caught. You know, the fact that they had him in custody at all is pretty impressive. I mean, they let him live? Really? I'm surprised. So he goes up there and it says, with a casual thought, the troopers that stood on either side of the governor burst into flame. Okay, again, that's it? It's just a thought? That's super unfair. It doesn't feel like later on, he has to turn the heat up a ton on the governor while she's like roasting. In order to turn her into pure ash, he needs the temperature to go up to a certain degree. And in order to keep that totally contained only around her, it takes a ton of effort. Like, he's sweating by the end of it and can't really pull off any more big stunts like right that moment because he's still really tired. But this, lighting these troopers up, seems to be nothing. Like, he could probably have lit up this entire audience and it wouldn't have even taken a minute. Which sucks. Like, this is not what we want to see. And he basically, like, feels the flames around the victims and encourages the flames to go harder, basically, which is really just the kind of malice that you have to use a power like that. I don't feel like I'd be able to get the most out of this power because it wouldn't occur to me to do anything like that. That said, I say that, I don't know that that's true. I can get really, really mad in the Target parking lot. So I could see myself doing some shit that wouldn't be great and just being like, oh, that's so weird. I wonder how that happened. And walking away with my sunglasses on to hide my orange eyes. So yeah, he flies onto the stage and says, oh, Governor Gregory, you don't want my support? And all the reporters back away and they're like, oh, shit. Calamity's momentary revelry was disturbed when a fleeing woman ran into her and bounced off her armored costume. Calamity kept her footing with little trouble. The woman tumbled onto her back and stared up at Calamity's face. Behind the lenses of a small domino mask, Calamity narrowed her eyes, dismissing the woman. And this is sort of interesting. Calamity is just not... She's fine with this violence. Don't get me wrong. She's not out here like, oh, we really shouldn't be doing this. But she has more boundaries. At least she has more boundaries than Roughshod. And it feels like if, for example, it were Aftermath standing there and this woman ran into him, he might just light her ass up just because. And Calamity, it doesn't seem to occur to her to do something like that. She's just kind of like, yeah, fine, go. And all she's here for is to like herd the press and make sure that they don't just run away terrified. She makes sure that they turn around and keep their cameras trained on him and cover the entire thing. And he gives a speech. The good governor here says you should fear us. She's correct. You should always fear your betters. He enjoyed the melodrama of playing the villain, the fear on the faces of everyone around them, the terror as they saw him use his powers to easily eliminate the men and women that were there to protect them. It was as heady as any alcohol, as much of a thrill as any sport. He's a bully. They tried to retreat again, and of course Calamity stops them. Watch closely. What you see today is only the beginning. A demonstration of the new order of things, the price of overcoming instinct. An instant of thought increased the surface temperature of the fabric of Governor Gregory's pant leg, which caused it to burst into flame. She shrieked and tried to pat out the swiftly growing blaze with her free hand, but it was unstoppable. Aftermath smiled cruelly as Gregory desperately tried to extinguish the flames quickly ascending her leg, her motions becoming more frantic with each failed attempt. After several more futile strikes with her hand, Theresa Gregory tried to yank her arm free. There was no breaking Aftermath's grip on her bicep, he was just too strong. The flames intensified and began to burn the flesh beneath her clothing. And she starts screaming, "Make it stop. Please, I'm sorry." "Yes, you are that," Aftermath intoned and pulled the governor's arm higher. He focused his will on the flames, felt the hunger in them, the need to consume. For a moment, he considered being benevolent, but first humanity had to learn to fear the awakened to accept their rule. Even Elgin's spears, Aftermath thought. Later on, when we're in Elgin's POV, he's like, this bitch is too chill around me. He doesn't respect me. And I think it's because he just thinks I'm a sleeper. And I'm like, that's 100% what it is. And he's sort of like tempted to reveal what he really is to Aftermath. And then he's like, no, that's just my pride talking. And I was like, I hate that you're right. And you know that about yourself. Like, I don't want you to have this kind of presence of mind and self-awareness because it's not helpful. You're ruining everything. So she just burns. And then eventually he does the thing where he realizes, okay, enough has happened. Everybody has gotten the message. And he zeroes in on her and makes her completely incinerate in this like bloom and turns her into ash. And there's the thought here about like, there was little point in continuing the spectacle. The message had been delivered. The destruction of a building was one thing. Lives were taken, but only those who lost a loved one in such a disaster would truly feel anything. It was too easy for the human mind to ignore death that was hidden behind concrete and steel. This would never be forgotten. 1,000 heroes saving 1,000 lives would never take this moment away. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, like, you know, it's effective. So then we have Roughshod capping off this demonstration by just tossing cars around and just being incredibly terrifying. And he is clearly like enjoying himself. This is part of what adds to the whole spectacle is how much fun they're clearly having. Like they are fine with this. But then we have this moment where Calamity steps in front of him between him and this like little girl who was maybe 8 years old. And Roughshod is like, we were never told no children. Aftermath said minimal casualties. He didn't specify a fucking demographic. No, Roughshod, I'm saying no children. Got it? And he tries to push her out of the way anyway. And she brings 2 fingers up to touch his wrist. Remember what happened last time? And I want to know what happened last time because apparently what happened last time was bad enough that Roughshod backs off. And he says that shit isn't going to protect you forever. And I'm like, isn't it? Because it sort of feels like it might. You seem pretty afraid of her. However, we are quickly shown that Calamity is not the bitch to try and like, you know, oh, thanks. Because this little girl tries to thank her and climb up her leg. And Calamity puts a boot on her forehead and shoves her off. And this really reminded me of Villanelle in Killing Eve, and how she could be really sweet and seem like a good guy, and the next second she completely turns it off and is like, fucking get off me. So then we go to chapter 9, in which Briar Young is indeed alive. I called it. I didn't really call it. I posited that he might be, and then I took it back, and then I said no, but he probably, and then I took it back again. So I can't actually claim full credit for this because I really wasn't sure, but I am pretty delighted that my suspicions wound up being well-founded. And he is so despicable in such a specific way. I feel like he's a really well-drawn bad guy because he isn't just oh, I'm going to run off and get out of this bullshit job that I hate around people I don't like doing dangerous shit that could kill me. He's I'm going to get away just long enough that I can collect myself, go back, and then kidnap and repeatedly rape and torture Jordan, film it, and send it to her fiance. That is a whole lot. And it's clear that he is completely disconnected from the reality of the situation. He sees her as his enemy for no good reason. She's out here trying to mourn his death, even though she didn't really like him. If she knew, I kind of want her to know this is how he's thinking, because she keeps giving him the benefit of the doubt, which he absolutely does not deserve. And what's interesting is part of his resentment toward her is the belief that if anybody were to track him down, it would be her. And he hates the fact that she would definitely be able to take him down. He would not see her coming because she could turn invisible. She's just so fast and such a good fighter, completely outclasses him. And he hates that, knowing that she could just completely take him down if she managed to figure out where he was. And let's see, a woman like Jordan Law thrilled in that strength, reveled in it just like his mother had when she abandoned him and his father. I'm just that feels like half a story, but sure. There were a lot of options for Jordan, and he would make certain to record every one he used. He'd also be certain to send a copy to Brian Agincourt. There was a score to settle there as well. There really isn't. You tried to grope his fiancée at a party. There's really no score to settle. You suck and should die. But unfortunately, he has not died, and I'm devastated. So, at this point, he runs across the newspaper that mentions Tokyo, and apparently he didn't realize how bad it was, or he hadn't seen a photo of a victim, because there's a woman clearly holding a dead child. From the way it's arms and legs are dangling, you can tell there's no life in that kid. And all of a sudden, he's really got a twinge of conscience, because he feels maybe if he stuck around, shit like this wouldn't be happening. But he also is just, he can't be in that headspace either. He can't handle that. So he makes himself, there's a real sort of Theon Greyjoy grossness to him, but Theon Greyjoy even felt more redeemable. Briar doesn't feel redeemable. It's just that you want him to care, but he's just, His own reflection was painful to look at, and Young turned to face the street. He hated feeling anything for others, but kids were different. No child came into the world evil. The world made them that way. And he is in the midst of this sort of storm of thoughts. And because of it, his guard is dropped. And so somebody manages to get the drop on him. And it's Arkady Maliev. He is alive, after all. And he is ready to just kill Briar. And basically, Briar is holy shit, we can make a deal. I can give you something in exchange. And he says, I'm good at acquiring things that are difficult to acquire. And obviously later expects that this guy is going to want him to steal a car. And I'm like, dude, you were involved in and obviously have abandoned the most effective metahuman unit out there. You think this guy just wants you to steal a car? Are you high? Of course he wants more from you than that. And indeed, when they go and talk a little bit later, it turns out that he wants Briar to find the information and help him break Crimson Shark free. He doesn't know where he is, so they need to zero in on somebody who would know, or somebody who would know someone who knows. And Briar was not counting on this at all. The whole idea of trying to break out this guy from a facility that's going to be as juiced up as it would doubtless be. Briar is not a brave man, really. Like, this isn't a thing that interests him. He wanted to save up some money, torture a woman, and then live the rest of his life on a private island, you know? And he finally mentioned somebody named Kent, who I don't remember if we know this person, but I don't remember him. And Young is like, how are you going to get him to tell you? And Arcadie's like, oh, that won't be a problem. And he's like, ugh, I knew you'd say it like that. So then we go to Jordan at Ryan's house and we see like all of the security that she has. And the two of them just talking about like, you know, their plans for the future. And this is what, let's see. Oh yeah, Ryan started to speak but paused with her mouth partially open. Her eyes moved back and forth as if she were reading something very quickly. You better answer that. It's using priority routing. I really enjoyed that, this moment of her being like, wouldn't that be great if you could just have her stand there and be like, okay, this is an actual call from a human being. This is not a robocall, so that you know when to bother answering the phone. So she's told to go to a secure line, and Douglas is linked in, and they go into, you know, a private room, and she gets told about what the fuck just happened to the governor of Washington State. And they immediately know how bad this is. Like, it's just, of course, you know. And this is when the director just looks at Jordan and says, I want him brought down. Do you understand? And she says, understood, director. But in her head, she's like, we'll see. And I was like, Jordan, no. If there is anybody who I think even Brian would agree deserves to die, it's this motherfucker. Like, just go talk to Brian and see what he says about it. I really feel he would be like, yeah, all right, fuck that guy. You know, like, honestly. Her gut told her that someone like Aftermath wouldn't stop killing until he was dead, but she'd promised herself she would work to a higher cause. Killing wasn't the first option anymore, at least not for her. She had no intention of murdering Aftermath or his fellow prisoners unless they forced her hand. Girl. No. I admire the sentiment, but there are some people that have forfeited the right to the benefit of the doubt. And choosing to burn a bunch of people to death on live television with a smile on your face is one of those things. I'm just saying. So, let's see. So she tells Douglas that she's going to borrow a car from her sister and she's going to come and pick him up in 30 minutes. And she comes out of the room and Jillian is running around the corner, has clearly been listening at the door. And I'm just hopeful that Jillian doesn't do something insane here, because I'm really worried, because she's working for Dr. Spears, that somehow he's going to like get info from her that she won't even know she's handing over, you know? And she walks over to Ryan, and Ryan is like, yeah, you can borrow my car. The keys are in the garage. I'm going to pull up files and figure out everything that, like, all the info I can for you. And also tell your teammates that they can come stay here, because my place is way better fortified than your government shit. That's bad. I was able to hack your phone in like 2 seconds. So come here. And then we get the last scene where we're with Dr. Spears, and he is having a drink with Calamity. Aftermath. Is Roughshod there too? I think he's there, right? It's the whole team. And this is where Dr. Spears is like, the criminal was far too familiar and made assumptions that they were equal. Aftermath clearly didn't care for the propriety between employer and employee, and Spears supposed the man looked at him with the same disdain he gave everyone he viewed as a sleeper. And he's also planning on getting Calamity in bed because he just wants to basically show Aftermath that he can, and that this clearly makes him his superior, which is wild. Like, the thing about that is that with somebody like Aftermath, that would probably actually work, you know? And what's so annoying is, like, from Calamity's POV, she has no interest, but also, like, a little interest. It's, you know? And I really don't want him to succeed in this at all, because I just don't want him to succeed in anything. But also, I don't really care if Aftermath gets hurt. So, like, why not? It's just mostly that I don't... The fact that Calamity's being used as a chip is what bothers me. Not so much like what happens to either of these shitty dudes. And this is when Whip Scorpion turns up. I hate his name. I'm sorry, but that, like, there's those two words that they're weird together. But he is trying to be like, hey, he's sort of in an argument here with Aftermath. Aftermath says we can handle them. Not that I doubt your assessment, Whip Scorpion, but much like we British taught your Delta Force teams how to do the job, our Awakened operators taught the first incarnation of Echo Team and the second. Whip Scorpion chuckled derisively. Yeah? How's that working out for you guys? I understand that they're undermanned and underpowered at the moment. Didn't you hand them their asses all by yourself? And they just kind of go back and forth. And finally, Spears interjects. And he says, I'll make certain Echo Team has difficulty accessing some of their resources. I may even be able to split their team up to a degree. I suggest we stop looking at every problem as a physical objective to overcome. Chess is a mental game, and I assure you we're in the middle of the biggest chess game ever played. And then we have the moment where he's like, all right, so one more large-scale attack. We're doing the planning for that. How is that going? And Aftermath is like, oh yeah, we're on board. And Calamity is very excited about it. I'm certain you won't be disappointed. The little party we put together will be unforgettable. And that is the end of the chapter. So I'm not excited about what they are planning to do, because it has to be horrible. Because they are horrible. But yeah, I just really am impressed with how much I hate Aftermath, because he's really, like, hateable. And also, his powers are just OP. They scare me. All right, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you, Heather, for commissioning this. Appreciate you being in the chat. Thank you, everybody who is listening and maybe reading along. And I will be seeing you guys again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.